It's a couple minutes after 10. This is with regard to stormwater plans. I'd like to request everyone join me in pledging allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I hope you don't all think I'm rude. I've got to leave here about 10 of 11. I'm so sorry.
The next I want to bring to everybody's attention that's here is that I encourage everybody through whatever means they may choose or whatnot to provide support for the victims of the Harvey in Texas and Louisiana. It's a major event, and I think that they all need our help. The purpose of this meeting is to receive a presentation with regard to stormwater. There will be no action taken at the meeting. There is no design public participation. I want to give a little bit of history with regard to council actions. The council has retained McGill and Associates and we've spent some substantial monies with regard to their performance of a drainage study and a stormwater drainage study and stormwater capital improvement plan. They've identified 46 projects that they've recommended to be completed over a 5 to 10 year period. None of those have been funded or anything like that. Obviously, paying for the consultant's been funded. The estimated cost that they had for those improvements is $1.77 million. That includes the cost of equipment to maintain them. The final thing that's public should be made aware of that the council's been involved in is authorized advertising for and creation of the position of a stormwater manager. And the interview process is underway with regard to that, who would then administer the stormwater management plan and would actually set out how it's going to take place, because that hasn't been, even though the projects may have been identified, that hasn't been established. Now, the purpose of this meeting, the way it came about, from what I understand, is that the planning board requested a presentation with regard to stormwater management. They invited council to listen to the presentation, and with that in mind, I'd like to call on Tom Vincennes, the chairman of the planning board, to introduce and any other comments that he wants to have with regard, introduce the speaker and any other comments he might have with regard to it. Tom?
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. We have two representatives today from the North Carolina Coastal Federation, Lauren Codley, who is going to be the presenter, and Mike Giles. Lauren, as I said, is Deputy Director of the North Carolina Coastal Federation. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Conservation from NC State, and has been working with the Federation since 1992. Her responsibilities in that role are primarily to ensure implementation of all of the Federation program goals and objectives. The Federation has been involved in many stormwater management projects in neighboring communities, including Swansboro, Beaufort, Surf City, Onslow County, Pender County, Nags Head, Wilmington, Oak Island, Cedar Point, and Wrightsville Beach. It was the work at Wrightsville which caught the planning board's attention, in that the Coastal Federation, on behalf of a collaborative team, was the recipient of the 2017 Raincatcher Award from the Environmental Protection Agency. and it reflected the work and the effort and the accomplishments of stormwater runoff infiltration projects in Wrightsville. Lauren has a history that goes back many, many years with Sunset Beach, and she is certainly a friend of the town. She played an important role in the formation of the Bird Island Preservation Society back in the 1990s, and it was that group working with a couple of other groups that was instrumental in preventing development of Bird Island and ultimately the acquisition of that property by the state to serve as a reserve. To this day, she serves as a representative on the local advisory board of the North Carolina Bird Island Coastal Reserve. So with that,
Okay.
all right, thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to come today. Look forward to speaking with you all. I'm 52, so technology's not my friend still, so I'm going to try this and see if it works. Wait, I should have, there we go, okay. Well, okay, so with that introduction, I don't think I need to go through this really, but just to, restate that the Coastal Federation, we are a nonprofit, member-supported environmental organization. Our main office is in Carteret County, but we also have an office in Wrightsville Beach, and that is where my colleague Mike Giles is in that office there. We have a large staff of almost 29, 30 people now. When I started back in 1992, we only had a few. And then we have a board of directors that we operate and work closely with. Our key focus areas are living shorelines. I know that the town is pursuing the idea of a living shoreline here in Sunset Beach. We also focus on oyster restoration, stormwater management, making sure that the beaches stay public and usable. Those are kind of some of our key issues. But the one that I'm talking with you today about, of course, is stormwater. And let me see. There we go. Uh-oh, did I just cut it off? Oh, no. Well, why don't we go through, we could just look through this until that comes back up. Do you want to do that?
Mhm.
So, well, there it is. Sorry about that. I told you I was bad. I wasn't kidding, was I? Okay. I don't know if anybody can look at this picture, but I want you to just think of stormwater in this way. The natural hydrology, before we developed, which I'm not saying we shouldn't develop. I live in a house on a coastal creek in Pender County. So by no means am I saying we shouldn't develop. That's not the answer. But I just want you to look at kind of what some of the impacts are of hard surfaces on the land. You see how the rain hits the roof of that house, and then the stormwater goes into that downspout. The downspout goes into the driveway. The stormwater then goes down into the street and then into a storm drain. And most of the time, people think, well, if it goes in that storm drain, it's going somewhere to get treated. But it's not. Most of the time, it's either going into like a stormwater pond or directly into our coastal creeks through a pipe. And that can cause costly and nuisance flooding for local governments. It also is, stormwater runoff is the #1 polluter of our coastal creeks, rivers, and sounds. So just kind of remember, rain plus roof equals runoff. So instead of soaking into the ground the way it used to, the rain is hitting that hard surface and flowing into surface waters. Okay, I did it. Take a look at just some of these examples. You see here we have on the very left, that's a convenience store in Pender County where I live. And so what we're doing is we're taking the stormwater, we're collecting it and conveying it. So the stormwater of this big parking lot, it goes into that downspout and then down into a collection system and then into the ditch and then out into Becky's Creek where I live. We use a lot of stormwater ponds, and the state has shown that those really aren't protecting water quality. The Division of Marine Fisheries, and this is coast-wide, they're the only agency that actually does ground truthing. So the Division of the Shellfish Sanitation section of the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries actually has a team that goes out and they actually test the waters. They're the ones that help determine whether waters are open or closed to shellfishing. They're closed after rain, and that's because polluted stormwater is running into that water and it has to be closed. Some areas are closed permanently and all the time, and others are open. but they're the only agency that's actually testing the water, and what their monitoring is showing is that shellfish waters and swimming waters are being impaired by polluted stormwater runoff. So kind of this chain, I like this chain that we had put together. It really shows a way to see the sequence is you have land use change, that creates hydraulic modification, which increases the stormwater runoff and localized flooding, that transports pollution, and then you have impaired waters that you can't use anymore. So think about like we work a lot with the Blockade Runner in Wrightsville Beach. That hotel cannot operate and keep the same clientele coming if they always have signs on their beaches that say no swimming due to bacteria, right? So it's really an economic issue that you have to think about. So the solution is to infiltrate the stormwater and mimic the natural hydrology. I want to show you this. If you can, this is Bradley and Hewlett's Creek. This is called a hydrograph, that bump that you see where it says 1981 in the slide, and that shows the volume of stormwater that was entering those watersheds in 1991. Down at the bottom, what we have are the shellfish closures. So the red means areas that are closed to shellfishing. Now, most of your areas that are going to be up in the headwaters of creeks are closed to shellfishing. But then as you get closer to the waterway, where it flushes really well and you have interchange, they stay open. But look at this. I hope this works. Okay, see, this is now in 1998. That's the volume of runoff they had. This is 2002. Do you see how those closure lines advanced? Oh, might be hitting somebody's head, but there we go. See how in 1998, now look at this. See how the shellfish closure marches? See how that marches forward? So do y'all get what I'm saying? So the increase in runoff is directly correlated with the increase in shellfish closures, which was something we found very interesting that really kind of, showed the case. So what our strategy is at the North Carolina Coastal Federation is we're going to fix this, right? So it's an economic and an environmental problem that is just unacceptable to have shellfish closures and swimming advisories if we want to all live and we all want to sell our coastal environment and the coast that we live in. So it's just unacceptable, and we've got to do something about it. So what we do at the Coastal Federation and what we promote is working in urban and rural landscapes to use what's called low-impact development techniques that actually slow down the flow of stormwater runoff. And what we're trying to do is reduce the volume of that runoff reaching the surface waters. So if you don't let the stormwater get to the surface waters, then the pollution is not going to get to the surface waters. Does that make sense? In the past, there's always been kind of an approach that actually tried to treat the pollution. And that really, if you prevent the stormwater from getting there, then you're treating all the pollution. You're treating the oil, the nutrients, the bacteria, and all the things that are problems for us at the coast. One thing I didn't mention is that bacteria is our indicator, and shellfish waters are very sensitive to that bacteria. So that's what we work with. Now, this photo here, I just wanted to show this photo because what I want to show to you today is that you can do low impact development large scale, you can do it small scale. We actually worked with Walmart up in New Hanover County. This is the Walmart store at Porter's Neck. It's one that was built about 2 or 3 years ago. And we convinced them to come meet with us. It was a development corporation called Paramount Development Corporation out of Myrtle Beach who did that particular store. And we met with them, with our engineer, and we convinced them to use the landscape islands that they have to put in anyway, as required by ordinance, but to put in, is there a pointer on this? I'm afraid to touch it. The top? Okay. Well, look, you see this, I'm sure. These little curb cuts here. See that? So instead of having the curb and gutter, or the curbing go all the way around, there are curb cuts in all of their landscape islands. So what that does is the parking lot is graded so that some of the stormwater goes into those landscape islands. So what they're doing is they're making what's called multi-use of the landscape. They're putting the water into the ground instead of collecting and conveying all of it to a stormwater pond. Do they still have a stormwater pond? Yes, they have a huge stormwater pond. But if this had been incorporated into their development from the beginning, they potentially could have utilized this technique and not had the stormwater pond, and instead of having valuable real estate wasted on a stormwater pond, they could have put a Taco Bell there. Do you see what I'm saying? So you're just thinking about useful ways to integrate the stormwater management with the existing landscape, like right-of-ways. Okay, I might need to speed up here a little bit. This is just another example, smarter way to manage stormwater. Again, this is Walmart on the left. This is a different parking area on the right, but that just shows how you've got little cuts so that the stormwater goes to those islands. And I'm not saying that all the stormwater from that whole parking lot goes into that one little island, but it's an engineered system so that one section goes to one island, another section goes to another island, and it's called multi-use and treating the stormwater or collecting the stormwater throughout the site. Here's another example. That's a parking lot using low-impact development. So those just kind of showing you a couple of the techniques, but on the next page, basically, to do a comprehensive study, and this is what we focus on at the Coastal Federation, is you want to prevent stormwater from new development, and you want to reduce stormwater from existing development or land use. So what we do is we work with developers and local governments on ways to incorporate low-impact development or stormwater strategies into maybe into their codes or into their new developments. But then we also work with local governments to develop watershed restoration plans and to try and secure funds to actually install some of these projects on the ground. As far as new development, I'm just going to give you one example because I'm really here to talk with y'all today about what you can do to fix existing problems. But this is just one example. This is a developer in New Hanover County. His name is Burroughs Smith. And this is a development he did along the Cape Fear River. It's called River Bluffs. It's right when you come into downtown Wilmington. It's in Castle Hayne. And basically, this is a quote from him, that he saved about $2 million in the development cost on 100 lots by not installing the curbing and by actually using the natural areas to infiltrate the stormwater. And he had to fight so hard to do that. The state and the county absolutely wanted him to build these huge stormwater ponds on this gorgeous property that was just sugar sand. So can you imagine if he had built a big stormwater pond there, in order to keep the water in the pond, he would have had to have paid to line the pond because it's sand and it would have just soaked right in. So none of it really makes sense. But some of this is evolving and just wanted to show you how. So that's just an example for how you prevent runoff on new development. You incorporate it into the project from the very beginning. For reducing runoff, the way we do that again is working with communities on watershed restoration plans and stormwater reduction measures. And this focuses again on that whole idea of mimicking the natural hydrology, and it really works well for smaller coastal communities. Just kind of in the past and in process, we've been collaborating over several years with several local governments. Just to give you an idea, one of the first plans we did was in the Lockwood Folly River, which focuses in Brunswick County, Oak Island area. Then we did one with Bradley and Hewlett's Creek. And what these are, they're watershed restoration plans, and they're plans that you actually get approved by the state. And there's even funding by your council of government. You can get funding from a council of government to actually develop one of these plans. And then once a plan is approved, a watershed restoration plan, you had actually positioned the local government to apply for funding from what's called the Section 319 program to put in retrofits. And I can give you guys some more information on that, and I think there's more in the body of this report. But these are just some of the local governments that we've been working with. Most recently this year, we approved a plan with Swansboro in February. The state approved it right away, and then we just were able to secure a $172,000 grant for them to do a total retrofit of their government complex. And so the purpose there is to not only reduce the stormwater on site, but to use it as a demonstration area, so that way that when people come to the town hall, they can see the different techniques like permeable pavement, rainwater harvesting, just infiltration or rain gardens. So that's just an example. Mike is working on one with the Lower Cape Fear, and then we actually, Stump Sound and Surf City, that's multi-jurisdictional, that's one in process. So the goals of a watershed restoration plan are basically to reduce flooding, to turn back the clock on water pollution, to try to get that hydrograph where you had a lot of runoff down to when your shellfish waters were open and you had a little bit of runoff. A goal of a watershed restoration plan is to look at your capital improvement projects or future ones coming up and how you might be able to align those with stormwater retrofits. The goal is to increase community awareness and participation with simple things that they can do. I'll show you the Smart Yards booklet in a minute, but there are really simple things that people can do on their own yard to reduce runoff. And again, the goal of a restoration plan, as I mentioned before, is to position a local government for funding so that you can actually get some government money, federal money, to come in and do some of these retrofits. I want to show you some of the implementation that we've done, just so you can get a better picture in your mind of what kind of retrofits we're talking about with the communities that we've worked with so far. This is in Bradley and Hewlett's Creek, so this is actually, if you ever go to Wrightsville Beach, this is driving into Wrightsville Beach. They've got a lot of landscaping there to work with, which was really good, and the North Carolina Department of Transportation was part of this project. But again, as I showed you the Walmart parking areas, this was simply taking runoff from the road and directing it into the landscaped area. On the right, the runoff used to be directed from the road directly into a storm drain that went out into a creek. Now the stormwater is directed into that landscaped area. You still have an overdrain, so if we get massive amounts of water, there's still that pipe system for the water to go into and then out into the water. So you're not depending totally on that landscaped area, but for your average rain that you get, I mean, this is not talking about a Harvey, right? I think we all know that. But for your average rain that you get, this would take care of the stormwater and reduce it by that much. On the left, it's also an example of curb cuts that just take the runoff from the road into the street. This is also in Wrightsville Beach. The stormwater runoff used to go again into a storm drain and into a pipe and out into the creek. And then now what this does is this directs the stormwater off of their parking area into what's called a rain garden that uses native plants, and it just infiltrates that stormwater because we have a lot of sand. I know we've got lots of mucky wetland areas as well, but at the coast we do have a good bit of sand, which is really our friend in this case for dealing with stormwater. So there's an overflow pipe, so if that system right there gets too much rain, it's not going to flood the streets, it's going to go back into that original system, but still this handles your average, rainfall. This is an example. This is looking off of the deck of our office, or the porch of our office in Wrightsville Beach. But what we did where that blue car is this is the parking lot. If anybody's ever been to the History Museum in Wrightsville Beach, are you familiar with that area by chance? It's kind of a government complex. What do you call it, Mike? It's not, is it called the History Square?
It's a historic square. That land is owned by the Department of Interior and town managed.
Okay, and so there's a big parking area, and what they've done is they've put historic homes there that were going to be destroyed. So we secured one of those homes and moved it to the site. But there's a big parking area that you see where the white and black and white cars are. When we went there, we actually got a grant, and we pulled out a section of that and put in permeable pavement. And if you look at this really closely, you can really see how the stormwater is just soaking into that permeable pavement and how it's running off the main one. So that's just another one of those techniques. And what we do is we give tours here. So we've got all kinds of techniques around our building, and we give tours about that. This is an interesting one. This is a DOT outfall pipe, and this is near the Blockade Runner Resort. It's called Iula Street. If you're ever in Wrightsville Beach, it's called Iula Street. So this, you can imagine the amount of stormwater that used to come off the main streets in Wrightsville Beach going out this pipe. And they've got one, I think, almost at every street end, which is pretty typical of coastal communities. So because they had the watershed restoration plan, we were able to work with Wrightsville Beach and secure a grant. And actually what we did, so picture this, it's a pipe coming out and then there's kind of a right-of-way. An area, I want to say it's 50 by 50 feet, you know, or not any bigger by any means. So what we did, went in and excavated out that right-of-way area and put in this thing, and it's like a huge French drain. So what this chamber does is the stormwater goes into this system, fills up, and then it's given time to slowly soak into that sand instead of just directly shooting out the pipe. If we have big storms, does it still shoot out the pipe? Yeah. But if just again for your normal average rainfall, this guy works. So then they covered it up, and that's what it looks like. So it's like you don't even know anything's there. And the pipe, you know, still comes out for the overflow, but inside the stormwater now goes into that big chamber. But it's still public property, it's still usable property, it still provides public access. So it has the same use it did before. And here are the results, which we found, which was amazing. On this project, we actually partnered with the University of North Carolina at Wilmington to do monitoring. And this project, this chamber, infiltration chamber, showed a 96% fecal bacteria reduction. And so, I mean, it just did an amazing job. It is taking care of the stormwater that was originally coming out of that pipe. So hopefully that's then going to reduce, or it has reduced, the frequency of having any kind of advisories there for swimming for sure. Now I wanted to mention just a few of the things that we've done in the Lockwood Folly watershed. The stuff in Wrightsville Beach was the Bradley Hewlett's Creek watershed. Do you mind turning to your little booklet that hope everybody has one of these? If not, we can share. But I can send you all more of these as well. But basically, we did this summary. We did the plan for Lockwood Folly, and what you'll see is that the plan basically said that stormwater is the culprit, and that's the reason why shellfish waters are closing in the Lockwood Folly. But then we did a series of different retrofits, and I can tell you the work, I mean, it could go on forever. I mean, unless people kind of start doing things on their own yard and we make a real commitment with funding. I mean, with such a large watershed, this is a huge watershed. So I guess my point is the job is not done here, but it was just interesting working. As you can see, we worked with the government complex to do rain gardens there, River Run Plantation, Winding River. We worked at the boat ramp with the Wildlife Resources Commission. We did some NCDOT retrofits, and a North Carolina State University study just came out on those retrofits at Highway 211, and just said that they are working beyond expectation as far as reducing runoff. Some of the work, like Waterway Park at Oak Island with a living shoreline there, different rain gardens, and then even working with Habitat for Humanity in Brunswick County. I mean, that was really a special project when we just worked with the Habitat for Humanity to put in things like a rain barrel, things that you can use anyway to water your lawn, but that would keep the runoff from entering waterways. On the back, we worked with Lakes of Lockwood subdivision. Y'all might be familiar with that subdivision. And then in Oak Island, this was just recent. This was actually, 2015, or it ended in 2016. We did a project with the town of Oak Island, and again, we were able to secure funding to do this project because of the watershed restoration plan that we have for the Lockwood Folly. So then turning back to the presentation, you guys can take this home and look at some of these sites and read about them more, but I just wanted to give you an overview there. With Oak Island and that project, what we did was work basically on side streets. And Mike, you feel free to jump in at any time here, but I'm just gonna kind of jump through. The goal of this project in Oak Island was to reduce the volume of runoff that was going into shellfish waters, and we wanted to reduce it by 200,000 gallons. That was kind of our goal for this particular grant-funded project. We were targeting 6 streets because at Oak Island, the runoff just goes directly into the water. And we were looking for the low cost and low maintenance techniques that we could use there for that project. So what we ended up doing, we're putting in a series of 6 street side swales. So, you know, it's amazing how if, now I look at a right-of-way differently, but if you have, even if you have grass on, if you have a street and you have grass on both sides of the street, if there is even an inch of sediment that's built up, or if the right-of-way is an inch higher than the road, there's no way for that stormwater to get there. It's just gonna bump up against that and run down the road. Here what we did was we just shaved off that bump, so to speak, and directed the stormwater into these, created kind of a long linear, small linear bowl, so kind of like this, right? Made it linear so that it kind of would catch the water, made sure that the water could get to that section by removing the edge, and put in 6 of those. And it's been an amazing project because it was low cost and has an incredible impact. One other thing we did there was we put in porous pavers and a swale on 2nd Street. So that also was part of that project. But the results, we actually reduced runoff by an estimated 384,700 gallons instead of the 200 that we were shooting for. So that's like an 85% reduction in the runoff that's coming off that property. And we worked. It was a really great project for engaging the community. So Mike actually had a group of citizen volunteers that went out, and Mike, do you want to tell them, do you mind telling them about how you did that?
Yeah, both in Lockwood Folly and Oak Island. Lockwood Folly we did.
Excuse me, you needed, that's for, because it's being live streamed, you
And
gotta.
what Lauren talked about with Lockwood Folly and Oak Island, we engaged the community. We sent out press releases and formed community volunteers to help us with this project. Not only we had grant money to pay for the construction of projects, we engaged the community. And what that did was made the community buy into what we were all trying to do. Lockwood Folly was a TMDO where we had volunteers go out and do actually water samples that were then tested with a state lab. And what we found out in all these communities and creeks and watersheds, that the problem is the same. We don't have to do this elaborate computer model called a TMDL, total maximum daily load. Instead, we can go straight to a watershed plan, and that's what we did at Oak Island. So what we did, it was a water quality. We weren't measuring the fecal coliform because we knew it was there. We could see the water was going down the road and emptying into Davis Canal and Intercoastal Waterway. So our volunteers, what they did pre-construction, they took pictures with their cell phone cameras of an inch plus rain and documented that water running down the street and not going into the street side swales, which were required in both local government and state government. Then after our contractor graded and made the swale better and replanted it, we took pictures and it documented the water going into these swales. So it was a great way to get work done free of charge, and it was a great way to engage the community and have them buy into it. In Lockwood Folly, we had such overwhelming response from our volunteers that the town and our contractors and the state folks called it the Lockwood Army, and they're still working. They're still looking for projects to do in their own neighborhoods and their in their communities. And these street side swales, your street department could do them. You really don't have to have a consultant or an engineering firm to do it. Your street side maintenance guys could come in, regrade those, replant them, and then maintain them. And that way, that water, that first flush, the inch and a half of the first flush is where the bacteria is. And once that bacteria is infiltrated, the water coming off the road and off your driveways or whatever is not as contaminated. Yes, ma'am?
Quick question on the swales, because that's something that Susan came back with on her visit to Oak Island.
Right.
And it sounded like one of the most effective, least expensive measures that a community could take to
And it's
solve some of these.
it's
But
visual too.
So when you do the swale, can you walk over it? Is there or is it a tripping hazard?
No.
Can cars go over it? I mean, what happens?
It's
on the side street.
It's on the side streets. It's very shallow. You can walk over it. People mow it. People park in it. You know, when you park in it when it's wet, it's going to create ruts. And then typically a local government is responsible for maintaining that right of way. But no, it's people mow it. Some people want to plant different plants in it, flowers or whatever. But as long as that grade is still where the water runs into it, it's doing its job.
If I can add to that, an example, local example, I can speak for Sea Trail. Most of the houses, most of the roads in the Sea Trail development all have swales. They don't have piped. The only piping is under driveways so that cars go over the driveways. The town does not maintain those road right-of-ways. And as a result, that's only been developed, substantially developed in the last 25, 30 years. Most of it has been, you know, within the last, well, besides the real estate decline, the last maybe 15 years. But they don't work. They've been, well, when builders build a house, they change the grade. And as part of the stormwater management plan that the town is undertaking and whatnot, is those all have to be re-engineered. And the only way that, I see the only way that they're gonna work is if the town has the responsibility to maintain those road right-of-ways.
Yeah, you know, a lot of cases exist. There's a fine line between a ditch and a swale, that's very true. And if you know, in those communities, if the water can't get to those swales, meaning if it's built up along the road and the water can't get into them. Also, I mean, we've seen situations in developments where the swale system, if you have that roof runoff connected. So remember that first picture where you have the rain hitting the roof and then the roof runoff going into the gutter and the gutter going to the sidewalk going to the road. Think of 1,000 houses that are all connected runoff like that going into the road that's then directed to that swale, then that's going to be a problem. That's what you're doing, is you're overloading that system. So here with Oak Island, I mean, it's not kind of a collection and conveyance system like some of those swales are. So I mean, just you have to keep in mind there's a fine line between a swale and a ditch, and I think some of them have been designed and
Well, my point,
permitted as a swale, but are actually conveyance systems.
my point basically is that without
Maintenance.
constant maintenance,
Mhm.
it just defeats the purpose it was
You're
designed
very
for.
right. I mean, you do, but the maintenance is easy. As far as what we're talking about here, as far as making sure that that street edge, that it's shaved off and that the water can get from the street into the right of way. But you're correct. But maintenance is an issue with everything too. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Lauren, right?
Yes, sir.
Lauren, you brought up a point you brought up a point that I'm sure caught a lot of attention up here and with our planning board. You talked about community awareness. And by getting a buy-in from citizens, particularly for what happens from the water on their roof, because you
Yes.
made a very good example of that, it's still their water until it comes out to the street or into the right-of-way. And you talked about funding. I think you said Section 319 or something like that.
Yes.
Is there a way, and I don't want a long explanation,
That's
but
okay.
kind of like a thumbs up or down from you. Is there a way that we can harness some of this grant money that would go directly to citizens for work that they would do on their own private property to reduce runoff from their property to the right-of-way or to the town of Sunset Beach property, the streets?
Yes, there is what's called the CCAP program is one idea I have. It's called the Community Conservation Assistance Program. It is a cost share program. They don't have a lot of money, but the things that we're talking about, maybe I could get, well, in a second, we'll look at this, and I'm gonna show you some of those techniques that people can do on their properties, but a downspout disconnection or conveyance is only $7. You know, for new construction, something the town could consider is, I don't know what you all do, if you have any, ordinance about parking or driveways, whether or not you have anything that deals with that or not. You don't have to, but that's one way to get.
Yeah, we have nothing that says that a downspout can't deposit directly onto a driveway.
Yeah,
That's-
this is such a tough one because a downspout and the gutters are the last things that go on a house. So it's really not part of your stormwater permit, and it is more of a building code, and it's not even a requirement. So it's really hard because the stormwater permits go to a developer at the very beginning, looking at the entire system. So it's really a tricky one. But I think education, outreach, I mean, we're leaving you guys a box of these you're welcome to have. When we reprint them, if you would want to put your logo on it, we're happy to do that as well. But there are a couple of funding sources, and you know, you can do education programs. If you look in this Smart Yards book, I just want to point out the impact that something as simple as a downspout disconnection could have. This little bullet, or this little box, the green box here, there was the city of Portland, Oregon has a very different situation than you all, because they had what's called a combined sewer system. So what that meant is their stormwater went into the same pipes that their sewer system went into, and then that all was treated. They need the pipes, it's too much. You can't, it's too expensive to maintain a huge conventional stormwater system like that. In Philadelphia, they're having problems. Mainly big cities have these systems, but it's just a huge collection conveyance. So they actually did a requirement. They had people take their downspouts off their roof and put them actually into the ground or into a rain garden or into a rain barrel, and they were able to reduce stormwater by 1.2 billion gallons each year. Now, of course, they had to redirect 56,000 downspouts, but it just shows you how much impact. Just if you picture a conventionally built neighborhood, and if you ride through and you see, I've seen some, and you probably have too, where the downspout is purposefully directed to the sidewalk, because I guess the idea is to get the stormwater offsite as quick as possible. I know Noelle said that's the way yours used to be until you came to one of our events and saw something, and then she just took a downspout and she turned it so it points into her yard and the water goes away. You're also helping recharge groundwater that way, which is good, but that can have a major impact. Doing, you know, native, some of the things in here, this has a section on rerouting downspouts. You can get them at Lowe's for $7. Native landscaping, buying rain barrels. It's important that you use the water, but rain barrels, I've really used mine this year, and it's been a great use of that water for tomato plants. Putting in permeable pavers, does it cost a little bit more to do the permeable pavement? Yeah, it does, but if it reduces the runoff and the flooding. Now, if you're doing it for a new development, like new developments get credit for permeable pavement now. So if they put in permeable pavement, and instead of putting in the stormwater pond, they can put in permeable pavement to get credit for their stormwater, then, you know, it then becomes very cost effective. So without a watershed restoration plan, you can't get the 319 funding I was talking about, but there is that CCAP funding. There's also the Clean Water Management Trust Fund, but you know, they actually don't have a cycle of funding coming up anytime, not this year. They're just getting ready to award new grants this year. But Mamie Kaysen is the Soil and Water Conservation District manager, I think. I'm not sure about her title, but Mamie Kaysen is who you would contact, and she's at Bolivia. And I'm happy to help contact her if you'd like me to, just to see if there might be some interest in doing something. They usually do it project by project, but I think it might be neat to see if the town wanted to apply for a cost share program, so where if the town maybe put in a couple thousand and they put in a few thousand, that you then could give out downspout giveaways or something. I mean, that's one idea. And what was the other part of your question?
Well, it really hones in on community awareness, and that's what the first thing you said. That's clicked in my mind. It's like recycling.
Very much.
It is something that the municipality can do a lot to provide information and maybe try to encourage or get enthusiasm. And for something like this, I mean, this could make our entire stormwater management plan a lot less costly because we'd be dealing with potentially less runoff. And
Yes, that is absolutely correct. And then, I mean, that's absolutely correct. Any bit you can reduce incrementally, it makes a big difference. I have not seen your engineered plan and what they have planned, but, maybe they would maybe part of that plan is to consider some infiltration. I don't know if that plan is suggesting bigger pipes and more collection and conveyance, but, I mean, I would, based on the positive results, the 90% reduction that I showed you at that Wrightsville Beach, that huge French drain, and doing systems like that, there are really great results with infiltration, especially utilizing the sand, utilizing the existing landscape. It's highly engineered. It's not fluffy, wacko environmental stuff. It's engineered systems. It makes an economic difference. So anyway, we would be happy to provide any, input or review if you wanted on your plan that you're doing and to see if there are any ways to incorporate some of these strategies.
well, there was one feature that you showed, you highlighted in a couple of your slides, where you were catching, it looked like maybe a 24-inch CMP that was going out, discharging directly into the bay or the water.
The DOT pipe?
Yes,
Yeah.
and you put in it was an engineered solution where it was more of a catchment kind of area, where
Yeah.
it was a underground detention. What kind of surprised me is that the benefit would be as dramatic catching the bacteria, whatever you want to call it, that close to the water. I would think there'd be minimum requirements of certain length of soil filtration.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, those kind of things, we have catchments all over the place, and to put those in, particularly if we could convince, well, some of it would be on right away, if we could convince people that this really isn't making their property undevelopable.
Oh, correct. No.
And those kind of things they would be key.
But I think you hit the nail on the head about preventing the volumes that are getting to that pipe to begin with is key, and that comes with doing it on a lot-by-lot basis, doing what Noel did and others. If you ever wanted to talk to Oak Island, they've got actually what they call as a Smart Yards program. So what they do is they've embraced the Smart Yards booklet that we put together, but they have like a Smart Yard of the Month. So what they do is they've done an education campaign about that, and they've got a checklist, and you check it off, like, do you have a rain barrel? Yes. Is your downspout connected to your driveway? No. And then I don't know how they actually do it, but they have a community board, if you have like an environmental committee or maybe the planning board, or they review applications, and then they give out a nice yard sign that says, I'm a smart yard. And then when people drive by that smart yard, it's kind of like, whoa, what's that? So then, they just started that, but I could connect you with the person there who started that program if you'd like as well, to see if that might be something. But that's a good way to do community awareness. If you have garden clubs or, well, there are all kinds of ways. You can put stuff on your website. You could put it on whatever your best method of community outreach. You can put simple messages on that, whether it's some sort of bill or notice or what have you. You can also do things, demonstration sites at Town Hall. That's one thing that really works well, because then people, when they come to visit Town Hall, they see those techniques. They have them at Surf City.
We've got a new paving project here at the Municipal Center, we'll call it. And maybe we can incorporate some things as we're doing some paving.
Oh,
because
boy.
the paving, the surface treatment can be very problematic. Because you were talking about if the water can't get, beyond the curb into the grass, then it's going to stay in the street. And there may be some resloping, engineering, working different gradients so that we can end up with a demonstration project right here.
Oh, that'd be great. And then even in Wrightsville Beach, they took their huge parking lot and they cut out, like they have the drain where the water runs to a drain in the middle of the parking lot. They cut out a 20 by 20 section around that drain and put in permeable pavement. So they're not spending the money to make the whole thing permeable because, I mean, that's just, they don't have that money. So the stormwater runs into the permeable pavement before it gets to the drain. Do you know what I mean by that? If you go to, I should have put this on here, but if you go to, or Google walktheloop.org, you can see some of these techniques that are in Wrightsville Beach as well, and the ones that are around our government complex. It shows some of the ones that I had in the slide, but it shows that permeable pavement section. And so that's another kind of outreach, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something that caught my ears. One is grants, because we were somehow, at least I was previously told that grants would not be available for this project. Two, your knowledge of the Federation's contributions have been highly regarded. Now, are you here to offer your help, and how do we get connected to you to ask you for your assistance? Like you mentioned earlier, that you haven't seen the plan. And I'm just curious, because Peter's an engineer, I'm not, I'm a paper pusher. So that all of us can understand what your role is and how you monitor it with the contractor and other kinds of things. In other words, how do we get connected to you, and is there a fee associated with it?
No, there's no fee. I mean, we're a membership-based organization, so if anybody would like to become a member, we absolutely welcome that. But as far as, I mean, you know, helping and looking at your plans and, you know, helping see if there's any way we can assist with that, I mean, we'd be happy to do that. If you all were interested in developing a watershed restoration plan, which is that plan that is actually approved by the state, it's pretty, we've got it down to I think a pretty simple approach. I mean, again, as Mike said, the problem's the same, the answer's the same. We developed a guidebook that helps local governments go through that, but what we're doing right now with Pine Knoll Shores is we've applied for a grant from the COG, and you have a COG here. And so what I would suggest that if y'all are interested in developing a watershed restoration plan, for us to talk to your local council of governments together and see if they would be interested in applying for a small grant. It's about $10,000 to develop a watershed restoration plan for Sunset Beach, and that's to restore water quality. And
Good.
then you would, if you got that plan approved, which you would, it'd be easy, then that positions you to apply for funding from that Section 319 grant program that I mentioned, because they only provide money for retrofits to local governments who have a plan in place. The plan is non-regulatory. We just did one with Swansboro. The board unanimously approved the one in Beaufort on the 14th. Currently working with Surf City on one. Basically, we partner with UNC Wilmington. We get the students to go in and do the things. What they do is they do GIS data. So they take a baseline year and they look at you know, the watersheds before the waters were impaired, like say whatever, 1985 or 1990. Then they use GIS data and they kind of overlay it with the development that's taken place, and they come up with a volume, amount of runoff that needs to be reduced, and that's what's required by the, that just gives you a target, and then you work toward that target. Like Oak Island reduced by that 300,000 gallons, you can kind of tally how you're reducing that. That coupled with the, you know, public education campaign, and then taking a look at if there are ways that you can educate or incentivize some of these techniques on new development, whether it's having sessions with the local gutter guy. If you have one gutter guy, one company that's in this region that puts in all your gutters, I mean, we're happy to come talk with them and see if they would be mindful or have ways to work with the developer and the, yes, sir.
To kind of maybe give you some insight as to where we are with our stormwater management plan, as the mayor gave some background earlier, McGill and Associates has done an engineering study for us. Where we are right now is they've come up with problem locations within our town. Working directly with our town staff, particularly our Department of Public Works, they've identified, for the most part, the condition, the status of our infrastructure for handling stormwater, what's working, what isn't, what's plugged, what they can't even find. So they've developed like 20 or 25 different locations or different smaller projects all within the town that have to be addressed. They've given us a list, if you will, of some suggestions, but it has not been engineered. It has not been designed. But there's certain requirements, or there's certain minimum standards that they've established as recommendations to us, like no pipe should be smaller than 18 inches. No pipe should be, reinforced concrete, not corrugated metal, or different types of materials that they've discouraged the use of. So we are really at its infancy, and in fact, the timing of your presentation is really perfect for us. We, as a council, for the most part, understand that we need to have a stormwater manager. We need to have somebody whose full-time job it is to not only look at what needs to be done and then what to do to fix what we have, but to provide maintenance long-term so that these facilities, in fact, our pertinences, in fact, stay usable and working and functioning.
Yeah.
So we're really at the beginning of all this.
Yeah, that's exciting though. Think about the steps you're taking. I mean, I really commend the town for doing all of this. I mean, you're really taking these great steps.
I have, I don't know if it's a series of questions or not, but maybe I can narrow it down to one. I'm familiar with just about all the techniques you're talking about. The area that I came from, we utilized all of those, and it's not it's not dissimilar from this area, except that it's substantially more developed.
Where was that, Mass?
New Jersey.
Okay.
And on south of New York City on the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And the areas had substantial river pollution problems. And I came from an area that there are two major rivers that emptied into the ocean. And so it's similar in that regard. And I know the steps, there are a lot of those techniques were part of the planning process up there. We've also, we're involved in substantial underground recharge systems. I mean, where you build a 130,000 square foot building with no surface water drainage, no place to put it, where they put in concrete structures underground that cost them zillions of dollars to do.
Oh, yeah, boy.
But from a town perspective, a regulatory perspective, I can understand the design criteria. It's hard to put that into a legislative form to say, or a regulatory form to say, you've got to do this, or you've got to do this, or take this alternative or that alternative. One of the things that come to mind when you talk about downspouts and things like that, the impervious coverage requirement I understand is supposed to take into consideration the amount of water generated by the impervious coverage. Now, Hiram, can we control that?
We already control the 30% for most of our zones. Anything over that has to be, an engineered solution has to be brought in.
All right, but is that I mean, the 30% figure, where does that come from? Is that state imposed or is that us?
That's us. It's just been in our ordinances since we adopted them.
So I'm not suggesting this, but theoretically we could go to 10%.
Yeah.
Nothing would develop, I understand that. But I mean, there's no state Because my experience is that the state takes a strong position on an awful lot of things that impact development that ties our hands. But it wouldn't in that regard.
No, that's totally local rules.
Okay, okay. I had substantial experience dealing with variances from coverage requirements where somebody wanted to expand their driveway and, by a couple of feet. And where we would require imposition of rain gardens or dry wells and for downspouts and things like that, they reduce the coverage to what it should, so that there wouldn't be a coverage impact, impervious coverage impact.
Yeah, and you can look at some other local governments, like I know Surf City, they just have a kind of a requirement that no runoff leaves the site for a new
Well-
development. So it's kind of the pre-development hydrology has to match the post-development hydrology.
Well, I know the systems we can control.
Yeah.
The individual development is where my concern is, how we develop regulations that would carry that out, on the individual properties.
For an individual lot?
Right.
Yeah, no, well, Surf City, theirs is a lot, at a lot level. It's not like a subdivision. They actually depend on the state stormwater rules for that, but I think it's on a lot-by-lot basis. But I'm happy to check on that for you. There are all kinds of, we have a, kind of a sheet that compares different ordinances that you can look at that might give you some ideas of things that you may or may not want to incorporate. I think the main thing to keep in mind is, and I think this is really easily approached, is the importance of disconnection. So not telling somebody you can't have concrete necessarily, but telling somebody that your concrete can't be connected, meaning your roof runoff has to go to your yard or into the ground. Or, the driveway, you could require a permeable strip at the bottom or a drain if you wanted to. But that seems to be the most effective and the most palatable. People don't like to hear that you want to limit the amount of development. I mean, ultimately, it all does come down to the amount of impervious surface, and the rain can't soak into the ground. But one thing that really makes a big impact on that is having all of that impervious surface connected. So if you think about the Walmart that I showed you, the first picture, the Walmart is a huge expanse. If you saw the aerial, it's just unreal, but it's a huge expanse of impervious surface. But in little tiny increments, the stormwater can still soak into the ground instead of collecting all of it to a stormwater pond. And like I said, they still have a huge stormwater pond. I never thought I'd stand up here and praise Walmart. It just doesn't seem like it should be my style, but it's just a great demonstration, I think. But so it's just an example of disconnecting the impervious.
I didn't want to have council usurp. I want to make sure that planning board, if they have, planning board members have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Well, we already now, on new construction, okay, commercial.
Uh-huh.
The building next door here has underground retention in their driveway, their parking lot. And the new dentist's office also has the same thing. So their engineered solutions already in place for new construction.
That's great. Now, is the town requiring, go ahead.
The problem is existing building
Right,
and existing residences, okay?
okay.
Where
Well, that's where either that cost share program with Mamie, getting your foot in the door there, showing interest there. Again, they don't have much money. Or doing a watershed restoration plan, so you can kind of make a checklist of a priority list of areas you might want to target, which could be both the education and things like the downspouts or the other. So is that their requirement for underground storage? Is that a state requirement? It's a state stormwater permit?
I wasn't here when those were developed, so I don't know.
Oh, well, no, it's some new construction going on.
Well, no, they're completed projects.
Oh, okay.
They were completed
I was just curious.
last year. I don't know, Tom,
Do y'all know if,
did y'all just argue that, or was that the solution by their engineer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, sure.
Well, Tom, wasn't it an issue, or wasn't it a fact that they were trying to get around the 30% maximum footprint of impervious? And in order to do that, we allowed engineered solutions
I mean,
where
virtually
material.
every piece of commercial development that's taken place here would
Yes.
violate that 30% requirement. Thus, the only way they can.
In order
put
to
in
have
the
enough
parking
parking
lots
per our
and-
ordinances
yeah,
and
right.
so on and so forth, yeah.
I mean, you know, well, with these commercial sites, I mean, even, you don't have to put the whole parking area permeable. But if you grade the parking area, so you've got regular concrete, and then you've got a strip of stalls that are permeable, I mean, they do that a lot in Wilmington, then you're directing that stormwater runoff into those. The one at Wrightsville Beach, which was a retrofit, they went in and, again, cut a 20 by 20 square that was around the drain so that the stormwater has a chance to soak into the ground. Might as well use the sand that's out here. I mean, it's a free resource, and then once that water's going into the ground, it's not going out into the water, picking up pollutants and bacteria along the way. You know, the bacteria source, some people have always thought that, oh, it's septic tanks, we need to put in a sewer. But I used to live on the canals in Surf City, and that was an example of an area that had septic tanks, and it did have a problem with bacteria. And then they put sewer in, and then they had an even greater problem with bacteria because the sewer system allowed me to build a big house there instead of having a little trailer there. I mean, you know, people built big houses because they could, because it was a sewer. But the bacteria problem, the pollution problem stayed the same. That's one good example. The bacteria is naturally sourced. It's not from septic tanks. It's from wildlife, deer, birds, seagulls, and it's fertilizer, yes, of course. And then it's just flushing off the land into the streets, or is already in the streets and is flushing into a collected system and into the water. I mean, that's not what the Coastal Federation says. It is what we say, but it's what scientists at UNC Wilmington say, scientists all across the country, and then that's what the sampling from the shellfish sanitation section of the marine fisheries is showing. I mean, there's just no, it is what it is. But the good news is, especially with the sand and with some of these techniques that have already come before you, showing like a 90% reduction in that bacteria and reduced flooding by using the landscape when you can to infiltrate some of that stormwater. I mean, the good news is there's some answers. And then again, that collectively with education and some sort of commitment from local residents would be a good thing.
We always called it recharge. It's
Yeah.
recharges,
Yeah,
and as
absolutely.
opposed to point discharge.
That's good.
The Len's comment, I mean, it's a good comment with, for instance, we're putting in a sidewalk on Main Street that's pervious concrete.
Oh,
When the
good.
park was developed, it's a parking lot and walking trails that are all pervious brick.
That's great.
And so it's new, with the new projects, we're able to do it. It's the older ones that, and part of the cost of this stormwater management plan that we're entertaining includes equipment, which would include sweepers to make sure that the cracks remain open so that the water does percolate into and
Sure.
recharge.
And
But-
there's some new product too that's actually a coating that actually helps with the maintenance of the permeable pavement. That I can send you that information. It's a new technique that helps. Because yeah, the thing is, concrete that's permeable is missing the component of sand. And so if we live at the beach and then the sand fills up those holes, basically you're going to recreate regular permeable. But there's a coating that helps, we found. I mean, I think y'all have a lot of opportunities, and you're already doing it. I mean, like you mentioned with these.
Well, a portion
these
of it,
developments.
it appears more and more that it's the older stuff that we have to deal with.
Yeah, and that's the case with like that pipe at Wrightsville Beach that wasn't put in yesterday. I mean, those street-in pipes. I mean, those are really those are problems. The thing is, DOT worked with us on that, and they really, actually Department of Transportation. I think that they can get credit for helping with some of these retrofits. So The other thing I failed to mention today is the importance of partnerships and collaboration in this. It really strengthens your position as a local government for future funding if it shows that you, like, you know, if we were to meet with you all again, we'd probably bring in, you know, maybe Shellfish Sanitation to talk about the watersheds around you and the water quality, what's really going on, what they're finding around here. And then we worked like with the Division of Energy, Mineral, Land Resources, the people that permit the stormwater permits for developments. They were very valuable. Bring in Mamie from Soil and Water. Nothing like making friends with somebody you might ask for money from, like, right? I mean, it's like a good strategy. First you invite them to lunch, and then, but we would bring in Mamie as a partner for sure, because she's very valuable in her role there with Soil and Water. And so what I said, Shellfish Sanitation, maybe DOT, Division of Energy, Mineral, Land Resources, Mamie at Soil and Water, Cooperative Extension. Folks in Brunswick County, they're just amazing over there, and they used to actually have someone who worked specifically on stormwater, but I think that position's gone. But the folks at Cooperative Extension can help you with, you know, potentially native plantings and things like that. So bringing together all those partners, what that does is when you apply for a grant and you list that you're collaborating with all of these different entities, it's kind of like, wow, these guys aren't just out there on their own. They've got commitment from the state and all these different federal agencies. So I would recommend that.
I,
I have a question for the mayor. Since Susan Parker's not here, would this new stormwater management position be part of the responsibility to be something that would orchestrate?
yes, that would, yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
all the study has recommended is that the things have to be done, and it's identified areas where it has to be done. How it's going to be done, and when it's going to be done, and whatnot is all going to be the responsibility of the manager, the stormwater manager.
That's great.
I mean, we would make the decisions for funding, but
In that job description that we and or that Susan and Lisa penned, it has excerpts of familiarity with techniques, those kind of things, which would be important to the managing the whole plan.
yeah, and there's been interviews that have taken place. There's been response to the advertisement for the position too. So I haven't talked to Susan as to how many, but I know that that's underway. All right, any other
Great.
questions from any or comments from the planning board members?
Well, yeah, just as a question, you know, Rich brought up the possibility of getting some assistance, a review of our plan as it's been developed at this point by the Federation. Is that something we're going to ask the Federation to do?
Well, it certainly, I can't speak for all the council members, but it's certainly something that they ought to consider and decide whether they will.
I have a question. I remember way back when, at the point where the sewer project was in its infancy, there was thoughts of requiring that septic tanks be pumped and that downspouts be retrofitted to go into those emptied septic tanks. And we never moved ahead with that. Does anybody know why?
Surf City would, I'm sorry.
Tom, the only thing that I can remember, and is that people were never required, I think, to fill their septic systems.
Well,
And-
certainly they were not required to fill it, but I thought the
Yeah.
thought was to have them emptied and then to run.
I don't think, I'm not sure if that
yeah,
ever occurred.
Well, it didn't happen, I'm just
Yeah,
wondering.
no,
There must be a reason why we didn't.
I have no
make a
idea.
change of heart
I mean,
on it.
that's something, you know, we gave that responsibility to the county, and as you know, they manage the whole effort.
And that was only an option that we're considering to allow in lieu of
Right.
replacing the tank, okay, totally destroying it, okay? But the county health department, that was their main prerogative to be able to legislate and say, you're required to do this. They washed their hands of it.
Right.
Didn't want any piece of it, okay, threw it back to the town, and we said, would just leave it lay, okay? And, let people have the option if they wish to use it, as a reservoir, for watering their lawns, et cetera. And, but no further action was ever taken.
I know Surf City, I spoke with the planner there yesterday. I told him I was coming to speak with you all, and I had a question about one of his projects, but he suggested that, or he mentioned that. So they must have some sort of program in Surf City where they're directing stormwater into old septic tanks. If you wanted to contact Todd Rademacher there, he would have information. They did a neat project. I was trying to get information from him about, they had flooding, horrible flooding in Surf City, and then they ended up working with DOT to just somehow direct the stormwater into the ground, because it's an island. There's lots of sand. And I tried to get information from him, like, did you have an article about it or a write-up or anything? And he doesn't, but it was some sort of cost share program with NCDOT. So there, you know, once you've got the interest, which you all obviously have, there are all kinds of possibilities and all kinds of people and agencies and entities that will help you along the way. If you decide you want to pursue development of a watershed restoration plan, I probably would need to contact the Council of Government in Wilmington first, because I haven't worked with them yet. And so I'll just say, if you call them and say, hey, we want to do a watershed restoration plan with the Coastal Federation, they're going to say, what are you talking about? And we've been working with the COG that's called the Eastern COG. That's the one in New Bern. And that's where we've applied and received funding for the Beaufort plan, and we're getting ready to do one with Pine Knoll Shores. But those grant applications are due on the 6th of this month. So if you wanted funding to develop a watershed restoration plan, you wouldn't receive it until like about a year from now. If you wanted to pursue it on your own, or budget it for next year, I mean, we're working again with UNC Wilmington, and it's pretty cheap. I mean, it's about, we've been able to do them for about well, I won't say 5, because I'd say 10. About 10,000, or we have a guidebook. And if you have folks in your town that want to help try to go through that guidebook, if you want to get on the list, we have a partnership with UNC Wilmington. What they do, and I hate that I failed to mention this too, but they take the group of GIS students that I mentioned, and they will, during one semester, which we could probably get it either, I don't know if we can get it for this starting semester, but we definitely could get it for the spring semester. I would put you on the list of a town that wants your watersheds categorized. Or what they would do is they evaluate the watersheds, look at all the shellfish sanitation data, and come back to you and present you with what they found, which would mean they'd provide you with watershed data and the hydrograph that we were talking about. It would be like a UNC Wilmington free project. You want me to do that at least? Or think about it and let me know.
Yeah, I don't know if it comes under the category of watershed. One of the things that I was really taken aback at and surprised when I started dealing with land use regulation in North Carolina is that well, two things. One is that they were very late to the table with regard to stormwater permits. But secondly, the fact that there are so many individual stormwater permits that, to give you an example, we're dealing with an issue with roads, private roads that were built that are to be conveyed to the municipality, but they can't be conveyed until the stormwater system is resolved. And just for Sea Trail alone, there's 32 separate permits. Every time they did a neighborhood, they did a permit. And I called up the state and I said, could you send me a copy of the engineered plan, stormwater plan? And they thought I had two heads. And I said, some engineer had to design this system, because I'm not an engineer, but I know water starts out here, and it ends up here, and it impacts everything in between, and there is none. And they said there's no requirement for one, which kind of boggled my mind.
I think what they did is phases. Probably a lot of developments will do several phases so that they keep it at a low density, low density, low density, low density. Perhaps, I'm not exactly sure.
Well, there's I mean, that the project I'm talking about, Sea Trail part was developed before there was a stormwater permit requirement, and part was developed after a stormwater permit requirement. The part that doesn't have permits is our responsibility. The part that's theirs, that does have permits, is their responsibility.
Gotcha.
But I just, for watershed, I mean, I know it probably comes into the category of watersheds, because the water starts out someplace and it impacts everything in between. And to design one system, standalone system, for 100 units, or 50 units, to me, just didn't seem logical, but.
I think
No.
what the mayor is saying is that developers got away with murder.
Well, and this is really unfortunate, but one thing we're starting to discover is that, so a developer comes in and gets the stormwater permit for like a neighborhood. And then that permit is transferred to the homeowners association. But the homeowners association, you change who's in charge of a homeowners association unless it's a big management company. People aren't budgeting to maintain them. What we've seen all over is that you have a neighborhood, there's a drainage problem. They go to the state, the Division of Energy, Mineral, Land Resources. They complain about it. The state comes and inspects it and says, oh yes, you're right, there's a problem here, but by the way, you're out of compliance with your stormwater permit. So then an unknowing, unsuspecting homeowners association is left with a major problem. And this is serious. We've had neighborhoods where the people have been unable to sell their house because basically they're out of compliance with a permit. And so they can't even sell their house. I mean, this is really hitting home, but then you've got homeowners, individual property owners that are having to dish out bucks to try to fix a problem that they inherited and didn't even really know about. I mean, no offense to a developer, it's also the state. It's just not a good system. It doesn't work, it doesn't make sense. So, you know, we're fun. I know of a couple of those in Brunswick County, actually.
Well, I don't think you and I are gonna change the system.
No?
One of the things that
But-
we do have to consider here, though, it has been pointed out that a lot of the work that we would need to do here is retrofitting or fixing existing problems. Our stormwater management plan addresses the broad infrastructure, if you will, but not the individuals. But as you pointed out, a lot of this solution is with the individuals. You know, one of the things that we will need to consider through here is how to incentivize, if that's the right word, the individuals. How do we help them, one, understand a problem, two, take the responsibility to fix it, and then, and in some cases, you know, provide financial assistance somewhere in the program. If we're talking about going back to the septic tanks, you know, I was one of the people who had a house with a septic tank, and we had a major cost to hook up into the sewer system, and it would have been even harder to handle if we had to go dig up the yards and put in a pipe system to run the underground drains into the septic tank.
Yeah.
You know, so, and that becomes a factor that drives people away from working to improve
Yeah.
the solution here, so.
One thing
So
we worked on
we have
this
to think through
summer.
how we're gonna help the people think through how they pay for whatever gets done.
Well, we had, along those lines, and I guess my last, I mean, I'll try to shut up, but that we had a really smart Duke student work on kind of a depreciation code to kind of look at, and we are just in the very beginning stages of developing this, but basically it would help a homeowners association know that, hey, you need to budget $3,000 per year over the next however many years to be able to maintain the system that you have. So it's like a calculator that would, you know, it'd be a big education campaign, but basically there are systems that need to be maintained. Legally, they're required to be maintained. Nobody knows how to maintain them, and they have no money to do it because it's been this just weird transfer on those neighborhoods. So that's a really messed up problem. That's one you guys can't tackle or aren't responsible for tackling, so I don't mean to imply that at all. That's a big kind of state problem.
There's any more comments or questions? I want to,
One back there.
we didn't really open.
There's a question.
Yeah, but they're not, it was not open for public comment
sorry.
at the beginning of the meeting. No, it's not open for public comment.
Talk with you after.
I mean, certainly you're free to communicate with her individually. And we want to thank you, Lauren. You provided an awful lot of valuable information. Are you interested in setting up an office down here?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll go to Frank Neesman's house. By the way, do y'all know that Sunset Beach was in the Our State magazine in June? It's about this big, but if you have that magazine and you missed it, it's the June edition of Our State magazine. It's got the top 100 places to go.
Yes.
And Bird Island is down in the very corner, I think, so.
Yeah, that's on our website. That was National Geographic named it, well, in addition to that, National Geographic named it the 4th out of the 21 best beaches in the world.
Oh, boy.
A large
Oh,
part of
boy.
that, a large part of that is Bird Island.
Yeah.
And, if not all of it is Bird Island. But and then TripAdvisor just named it the top 5 vacation values,
Oh, my goodness.
top 15
Oh,
vacation
boy.
values.
So we all gotta get ready for these people, huh?
And then we're gonna set up a toll booth out on
There you
the-
go, good idea. Yeah, I think it was my 3rd day on the job in 1992, and I got a phone call from Bill Ducker saying, hey, can y'all help me? This guy wants to build a bridge across Mad Inlet and build a bunch of houses over there. So then for the next 10 years, I had the pleasure of working on that project. So it was nice. It was a
All right,
happy ending.
if there's no more comments, then
Thank you very much.
I'll close this portion, this meeting, this special meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank
Mike
you
and
for
I
your
enjoyed working
presentation.
with you. Thank you.
You have Lauren's last name. I have the representative.